It's an honor for me to have this opportunity to address the CTBUH Conference on the Resurgence of the Skyscraper. I am Michael Adlerstein. As an Assistant Secretary General, I was responsible for the 7-year, $2 billion renovation of the United Nations headquarters, which has been completed and closed out as of a few weeks ago. Our skyscraper, the Secretariat building, with a mere 39 stories, may not be the most impressive of the buildings that are being discussed today and might not even be visible from some of the taller buildings. It was, however, the prototype for all the modern curtain walls office towers almost 70 years ago. The Secretariat building is part of the UN headquarters, which was not created by a single genius, but by a collaborative team who did what you have been doing here at the CTBUH for years, collaborate. The original designers, who included Wallace Harrison, Le Corbusier, Oscar Niemeyer, and several other stars of their countries, brought their experience to the table, listened to each other, and developed new ideas. As we all know, collaboration breeds success. Before explaining our project and its accomplishments, I'd like to provide some of the early and less known history of how the UN headquarters was built. Its planning and design is a great New York City real estate story. President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill coined the term United Nations to refer to the Allies during World War II. The UN was born in the ashes of World War II, and the conviction that an institution was needed to avoid World War III. The first meeting of the UN General Assembly was in London in 1946. One of the first decisions taken was that the UN's permanent headquarters would be in the United States. That decision started a heated competition in America as to which city would be selected. Predictably, New York City was very aggressive for the honor. The Permanent Headquarters Committee, chaired by the country of Colombia, narrowed down the search to Boston, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and New York. Philadelphia assembled a 10-square-mile parcel in the suburbs and was so confident of its bid that it started consideration of the legislation needed to condemn the land. As consensus for Philadelphia was growing in the General Assembly, Secretary General Trig Van Lee was contacted by Mayor O'Dwyer. The mayor had been called by William Zeckendorf, the owner of the 17-acre parcel on First Avenue, which was the site of slaughterhouses and other industry. Zeckendorf had been assembling the parcel for years for a large redevelopment development known as X-City, designed by Wallace Harrison, but the project was turning into a financial loser. Harrison, through his wife, was related to the Rockefeller family and knew that Zeckendorf was ready and willing to abandon the project. Through Harrison, Zeckendorf contacted Rockefeller and created a coalition with the mayor and Bob Moses to advance the proposal for the First Avenue site. Rockefeller, who had just completed Rockefeller Center with Harrison, was a strong advocate. In just a few days, the New Yorkers prevailed to retain the title of World Capital, disappointing Philadelphia. Zeckendorf sold his land for $8.5 million, paid for with funds provided by Mr. Rockefeller. Harrison quickly redrew the X-City designs and wrote General Assembly over the Opera House. The reuse of the X-City plans, beautifully rendered by Hugh Ferris, was very influential with the UN Selection Committee and also established the design character of the World Headquarters. In the context of today's land use decision-making, it is remarkable how quickly the UN reached agreement on the site and then quickly developed and approved a set of completed design and planning documents. Within weeks, an international design team was selected and assembled by the UN, the Board of Design, under Harrison as director. The planning process, unlike most UN deliberations, was short, efficient, and very successful. They planned and debated the layout of the UN for only 4 months and then agreed on a plan. No public review, no planning or building department approvals were needed for the sovereign territory of the UN. Construction began in 1949 and continued until the last portion of the project. The General Assembly building was completed in 1952. Le Corbusier, who is the second from the left, was the oldest member and the most influential member of the original design team. However, China and the Soviet Union and France and, of course, the United States and Great Britain were also represented on the team. At the time it was built, the complex was a highly innovative facility employing the best of new technology. The modernist planning idea of organizing discrete but interconnected buildings in a poetic manner and the open spaces between the UN's chambers were ideas well ahead of their time. The technology was cutting edge. The very high-tech glass curtain wall was one of the first of its kind on that scale and later followed by thousands of buildings. The headquarters was the first custom-built facility with simultaneous interpretation. This was a very big deal at the time. Diplomatic meetings before the UN would require enormous delays for interpretation of every speech. The UN was a successful experiment after the League of Nations in simultaneous interpretation. The use of river water to naturally cool the chiller plant equipment was also ahead of its time. The conference rooms were wired with the newest recording tool, television. The beautiful leather furniture of pre-war chairs was replaced with modern synthetic naugahyde, and the heavy marble tables that were used in most Capitol buildings were replaced with the new magically diverse Formica. This was the new post-war era, and the technology was cutting edge, but by the first decade of the 21st century, 70 years later, our facility had aged and needed more than a facelift. The goal of our renovation was to renovate the UN's headquarters by upgrading and modernizing its infrastructure, restoring the character-defining historic features, respecting and applying the New York City building safety and fire codes, and making the headquarters more secure, energy efficient, and sustainable. Building a more sustainable UN headquarters was one of the top priorities of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. During his entire tenure, the Secretary General has sought to galvanize the global public, and especially its world leaders, to understand and reduce our impact on the Earth's climate. In 2007, at the very beginning of the Capital Master Plan, Mr. Ban directed that the renovation should lead the world by example, and that I should identify ways to reduce our own carbon footprint so that we too would become more environmentally responsible. The Capital Master Plan provided us with the once-in-a-generation opportunity, through design, to adopt modern and efficient technologies, to reduce our power usage, water consumption, and our carbon footprint. The requirements for LEED's gold were included in the renovation design. One way was to improve the functionality of a facility designed for 50 member states to a world family that now has 193 member states. Another was to preserve the iconic 1950s feel of the original premises. And of course, we needed to bring the UN into the modern era of blast security. The headquarters was completed in 1952 in accordance with the New York City Fire Code at that time, which dated from the 1930s. Much had changed over the years, but the UN headquarters remained largely unaltered. Consequently, much of the complex lacked sprinklers, fire and smoke detection devices, and even modern building management systems. We therefore wanted to emphasize both safety and security to make the headquarters consistent with not only the local and national building codes, but also secure given the local security environment. Unfortunately, the United Nations staff and buildings have been in recent years been a target of several terrorist attacks, in Baghdad, Algiers, Kabul, and elsewhere. Our project was required to incorporate major improvements to the security infrastructure and to provide greater protection for the UN staff, delegates, and visitors. Another driver was to preserve the iconic 1950s feel of the original design. Our compound was an architectural masterpiece, but it looked tired and in need of a complete upgrade. After years of debate and preparation, which began in 1998, and following approval by the General Assembly in 2007, the construction and fit-out of temporary office and conference space commenced in mid-2008. The Secretariat building renovation was completed right on schedule in 2012. We completed and occupied the General Assembly building in preparation for its renovation, which was completed on time in September of 2014, and our scheduled goal was to host the general debate in 2014 in the renovated home, and we were successful. The final cost of the project, $2.2 billion, is just 11% over the original budget approved 8 years earlier for the complete renovation of the facilities. To complete a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar project with only 11% overrun was a rare achievement. On our highly skilled and talented team of design and management professionals was HLW International, Heinges, Perkins & Will, and Siskin Hennessy Group serving as our engineer, and Skanska as our construction manager. Gardner and Theobald was our program manager. Although the United Nations is sovereign and not subject to New York City building codes or other regulations, at the beginning of our project, we reached an agreement with city authorities to voluntarily apply the New York City Building Code to our project. We agreed that we would not file for building permits or await certificates of occupancy, and the city agreed on an expedited review of our construction documents and voluntary visits, not inspections, to review our work. The FDNY are the first responders to any emergency at the UN, and it was certainly in our mutual interest for them to be familiar and comfortable with the UN premises. The Office of the Capital Master Plan, mindful of the fact that a third of global greenhouse gas emissions are caused by buildings, designed the renovation of the UN to meet the requirements for LEED Gold. This standard has not only been met, but in the case of the Secretariat building, it has been exceeded. The renovated Secretariat building meets the standard for LEED Platinum. As a result of the Capital Master Plan, total energy consumption of the UN headquarters was reduced by 50% as compared to conditions before, and we've reduced our carbon footprint by over 45%. We've also reduced our consumption of fresh water by 40%. I'm often asked by member states if it would have made more sense to completely demolish and build a new UN. It's a reasonable question, and the answer is no. Even aside from the obvious loss of the historic and iconic cultural values of the building, it would not have been less expensive. And from an overall energy and environmental standpoint, it would have been a major waste of carbon. The most noteworthy energy-saving decision associated with the Capital Master Plan was to renovate rather than demolish and build again. The reuse of a building is the avoidance of the expenditure of the embodied energy and other so-called embodied effects of construction activity. The energy used to extract, fabricate, deliver, install, demolish, and dispose of a particular material. In the case of the Capital Master Plan, we preserved 95% of the existing exterior walls, floors, and roofs, avoiding the expenditure of enormous energy by preserving the main elements of the original building. The renovation of the UN headquarters demonstrates that even with iconic complex of this historic buildings, with conflicting budgetary and programmatic and security demands, a highly sustainable renovation, a very green project can be executed while fully respecting the character-defining features of the building. Not only has the Secretariat building been modernized and renovated without losing its unique features, with its completely refurbished curtain wall, the tower has even been returned to the original tint and transparency of its facade, which had been lost over time. The general debate of the UN headquarters last month reflects that much of the world now accepts that man-made climate change is real. Many say that one of the triggers of the recent surge in violence in the Middle East is related to climate change. As our deterioration and as of the climate continues, as design professionals, we must clarify the decision-making process when more space is needed by any client. Renovation must be more seriously considered before we abandon that road in favor of new construction. New York and the world is having a love affair with the skyscraper, and I welcome this renaissance of skyscrapers in all parts of the globe. I invite you to include in this renaissance the consideration of the preservation of the many existing skyscrapers, the iconic ones and the simply functional ones, and other carbon investments made over previous decades for the sake of preservation, but also for the sake of sustainability. I hope you have the opportunity to visit the UN on Wednesday or at some other time. For those of you who signed up for the tour, I'm looking forward to welcoming you there on Thursday. Thank you for your attention.